Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Email on Tap. I'm your host, Anthony Chuli, and today I'm joined by Seth Charles, the Principal Email Deliverability and Industry Relations Manager at Iterable. Seth, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
So tell me a little bit about Iterable and your role there.
Yeah, so Iterable is basically a growth marketing platform that allows senders to communicate with their customers in a bunch of cross-channel ways. So whether it be SMS or email or push notifications.
And oftentimes we talk about deliverability, which you're clearly an expert in. One of the most common questions that I typically see is, what's the difference between delivery rates and deliverability rates? Can you explain that?
Yeah, so it's super common. So typically when we talk about delivery rates, that's a technical handshake, a successful transmission of a message, right? So like we're asking a receiving server to accept a message and they say, yes, we'll accept it. The deliverability rate is a little bit harder to gauge, and that's whether or not your messages are actually delivering to an inbox or not.
And talking about deliverability, most often than not, marketers and brands are focusing on what I like to call metrics from their ESP or ESP-centric metrics. Those would be open rates, delivery rates, which you just talked about and defined, spam complaints, unsubscribes, and opens and clicks. But there's metrics and signals beyond what an ESP can typically offer that mailbox providers or ISPs are also paying attention to. What are some of those metrics, and why should marketers care about those?
Yeah, well, there's actually a ton, right? So like after a message gets received by a server, say at Gmail or whatever, a lot of things go into whether or not a message goes to inbox. And the things that inboxes or the receiving servers weigh are things like whether or not a message was starred, or whether a message was originally delivered to spam and then actually moved by the recipient to the inbox, or whether it was replied to or forwarded. So those are all a ton of kind of behind the scenes metrics that a sender should definitely be concerned with.
So it's almost as if the ISPs are looking at their own set of signals beyond what an ESP has visibility into that's happening in their webmail or in their inbox experience that are certainly important to reputation.
Yeah, traditional metrics are always going to be super important to worry about, but that's just really the tip of the iceberg on kind of what goes into filtering decisions that they make. So it's always important to understand kind of how your users are going to interact with that mail kind of over time.
And speaking of reputation, there's been this evolution as of late from more of an IP-based reputation for senders that are tied or anchored to an IP address, and more an evolution and shift into what we call domain reputation. Can you talk a little bit about domain reputation and why it's important?
Sure. So yeah, to your point, IP reputation is always going to be around. It's always going to be a thing. So, but kind of as we're finding that in the IPv4 space, so the 4 octets of an IP, as we start to run out of room, there's been a shift towards this kind of IPv6, which is another octet added onto the end. So it's going to be virtually impossible to track and maintain reputation at scale for that many IPs. So for that reason, there's been a huge shift over the last 3-4 years, and something I expect to continue, where the reputation that lives behind the authentication protocols, so like the SPF records and the DKIM records and the sending domain, there's going to be a huge shift towards that because it's a little bit harder to spoof at scale and a little bit easier to track as a sender and as a recipient.
So does that mean now when we talk about warming, which is a common practice for any sender either obtaining new IPs or moving to a new ESP, the warm up process, does that now extend beyond just IP warming, and now it's if you have a new domain or you spin up a new domain, that the new domain needs to be warmed as well?
Yeah, definitely. So like if you're warming, obviously if you're moving ESPs or you're transitioning to a new IP, those are things that senders are pretty well versed in, that you have to warm up. But also anytime you're adding a subdomain or you're essentially shifting any of the sending elements, meaning your SPF domain or your DKIM domain or your from domain or your IP, anytime you're changing one of those fundamental elements of a message, you're going to want to at least kind of reel in the volume a little bit to at least do it in a real deliberate way, and that way you don't raise any red flags there.
So let's shift gears and talk about Gmail, the largest webmail provider on the planet, right? What I've particularly seen is when marketers or brands have challenges with deliverability, oftentimes it's with Gmail. What makes Gmail so difficult and so unique to deliver to?
Well, I mean, they're challenging because they are the biggest and because they're the most cryptic about a lot of the metrics that they kind of the feedback that they give to senders, and also because they're the most sophisticated. So, I think that it's fairly well known now that Gmail is a recipient by recipient type filter. So their machine learning is so advanced, and they have thousands of different elements that go into their filtering decisions. So, it makes it really hard for senders to kind of get a grip on how to change programmatically, because again, Gmail is so unique to each recipient, to where you really have to tailor your sending practices to deliver as much value to the individual recipient as you can.
Yeah, I certainly have experienced that, and oftentimes what I see with Gmail and Google in itself is leading from the front in innovation regarding their webmail design, features, filters, machine learning, and most recently the Gmail Annotations, which has been exciting in the space. Talking about Gmail Annotations, do you think that Gmail Annotations for the promo tab will change or maybe optimistically stop the conversation for marketers demanding of how to get their mail out of the promo tab and into the primary tab? Do you think that'll change that dialogue?
It'll change it for sure. So I don't know that it'll necessarily stop it, because senders typically want the primary tab because it, as a general rule, will generate a little bit stronger engagement, but it'll definitely change it. So it's providing a little bit more incentive for senders to be a little bit more strategic about the way that they're marketing. So whether it be your featured images or some kind of featured CTA or something within the message that you want to highlight in that annotation. So it'll make it a little bit more dynamic and exciting for senders. But I think it'll definitely be something to keep an eye on, and something that senders should be excited about.
Yeah, I would agree. You've worked extensively over your career on the front lines in deliverability consulting with many brands. What are some of your pet peeves of marketing or email marketing that you're seeing customers do that just irritate you or get under your skin?
Yeah, one is definitely going to be, when senders don't really pay that close attention to engagement when they're modeling their campaign frequency. So if they're sending 30 messages to somebody in a month that open every single message, but they're also sending 30 emails a month to somebody that hasn't opened a message at all from them in 6 months, that's going to be a huge red flag, and something that's definitely going to damage reputation. So senders that don't really pay attention to engagement is definitely a problem. And then also, just kind of anecdotally, we deal a lot with senders that, they don't really want to take agency or ownership over deliverability. And honestly, it comes back to the senders are the ones that are driving the reputation. It's not necessarily the pipe to kind of the email universe. It's more so just, it's on them, so they can own it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to harp on is marketers and senders own their reputation, and it's not the sole responsibility of the ESP or the platform that you sit on. Yeah. It's an excellent point. To close this off, I want to talk about data for a minute, and data fuels digital transformation, and it's kind of the center stone for many digital marketing strategies for brands. But what often goes unnoticed is the quality of data. And from a deliverability perspective, I'd be curious to ask you your opinion on kind of that top of funnel approach of getting clean and verified and validated email addresses onto your list at first, because if you don't, what are the ramifications downstream that you've seen with deliverability when brands are perhaps doing co-reg or not verifying email addresses or purchasing list, or just have kind of loose goose acquisition sources for email addresses?
Yeah, well, top of funnel is everything, right? So like you're only going to be as healthy at scale as you are kind of in the way that you collect data in the first place. So, for senders that are purchasing lists, that's a great way to get on a significant blacklist. That's a great way for, the major providers like Microsoft and Gmail and Verizon now. You basically spotlight yourself as somebody that's not going to be doing things in an ethical way. So, and then we talk about things like spam trap hits and all these things that kind of feed into your overall deliverability. So, for senders that don't really pay that close attention to top of funnel hygiene, there's a great chance that they're going to run into problems.
Well said. Yeah. Seth, this has been very insightful. Thanks so much for sitting down with me. And thanks everyone for tuning in. We hope to see you on another episode of Email on Tap.